Hello and welcome to Fractions with me, Bill Heening. Well, in this session, the aim is to deliver learning that provides the required knowledge to support learners in completing the Level 1 and Level 2 maths. Our objectives today in this session is read, write, order and compare common fractions and mixed numbers, find fractions of whole numbers, quantities or measurements, identify and know the equivalence between fractions, decimals and percentages, order, add, subtract and compare amounts of quantities using proper and improper fractions and mixed numbers. Express one number as a fraction of another, and anything else that comes up. Okay, now let's start at level 1 and we'll go from there. Now, a fraction is a number that lies between two whole numbers. For example, 1.5 lies between 1 and 2. There are three different types of fractions. You have a proper fraction, and you can see 1 over 2. The numerator, which is the top number, is smaller than the bottom number, which is known as the denominator. We have something called an improper fraction. So it's 3 over 2, and you can see the top number is bigger than the bottom number. That's called an improper fraction. And finally, you have a mixed fraction. That's a mixture of whole numbers and a fraction. Okay, so we'll develop these further when we get up to level 2. So what do fractions consist of? Well, let's use a pizza analogy. Okay, now you can see the top number, the numerator, right, shows the number of parts of the total there are. Okay, and if you look at this pizza here, you can see you have a pizza that's been cut into 4 parts and you have 1 part. And what does the bottom number represent? Well, the bottom number, or the denominator, represents the whole value of a shape. And again, using the pizza analogy, you can see if you take a pizza, cut it into 4 parts, you can see right away that the bottom number represents this whole value in this shape. So in this scenario, you have 1 part of 4. It's as simple as that. Okay, so now let's look at the skills you will need to work with fractions. At level 1 and 2, there is not many skills you need to understand, but if you can master these skills, then it'll make life a lot easier when dealing in fractions. Now, the first of these skills we're going to learn is something called equivalent fractions. Now, these are fractions that have different numbers on the top and the bottom, but are equal in size. They occupy the same space in a shape. Now, let me show you. You can see here you have a pizza that's cut into 4 parts. And one of these parts has been eaten. So we are left with 3/4. Okay, now that's expressed in fractions as 3/4. Now imagine we take this shape and we further subdivide it into 8 parts. You can see there we're further subdivide it again. You can see you've got 2 parts missing, but you've still got 6 of the 8 parts left. Okay, and so that's 6 over 8. And you can see that although it's been cut into 8 different parts, it's still 3/4 of pizza. So these are called equivalent fractions. You can multiply or divide. It doesn't matter which way you go. If you're multiplying or dividing, you go up in proportion, which means if you double the bottom one, you double the top one. If you remember your ratio, that's called direct proportion. If you take the pizza again and cut it into 16 parts, you can see again, when you cut it into 16 parts, you still have 12 of these parts, or 12 segments. Okay, and you can see again, it's just the same as 6/8. It's just the same as 3/4. It just takes up the same space in a shape. Now, this is important because this skill is vitally important when adding and subtracting fractions, and we'll do that later on in the presentation. Okay, the next skill we're going to learn is comparing fractions. Comparing fractions is relatively easy when using a calculator. You just simply divide the top number by the bottom to convert to a decimal. Then you compare. For example, you may be presented with questions like this. And so you just simply divide the top number by the bottom. So you can see 1 divided by 2 is 0.5. 5 divided by 6 is 0.83. 13 divided by 10 is 1.3. And with this last one here, okay, you only need to divide the 3 and the 4. The 1 stays as it is. The whole number stays the same. You just divide the 3 by the 4. So 3 divided by 4 is 0.75. add the 1 back on. Okay, and you can now see you've converted it to decimals, okay, by using the dividing line. Remember that line in fractions called the divisor? Okay, the dividing line, so you just simply divide the top by the bottom. You've now converted it to decimals, and you can see very quickly that that is the smallest. There's your second smallest, there's your third smallest, and there's your final, your largest. Okay, so that's how you do it. But what if you don't have a calculator? What if it's a non-calculator question? Well, let's have a look. Now let's look at it without a calculator. Okay, so for this method we'll go back to old school. Okay, so you can see in the first one here, okay, it just simply means 1. Remember, that's a dividing line. 1 divided by 2. Okay, and if you follow that, you can see there it's back to the old bus-stop method when you're doing division. Okay, so you start off with 1 divided by 2. 2 into 1 doesn't go, so you put the 0 up, put your decimal point in, add a 0. 2 into 10 is 5. And so you can see from experience that 0.5 is just the same as a half. And so you go through all the rest of them using the bus-stop method. So you can see that 5 divided by 6 is 0.83. 13 divided by 10 ends up at 1.3. Okay, and the last one here, and we'll go through this, so we'll develop this more at level 2, but you have to convert that to an improper fraction like this one here. Okay, so it's 4 multiplied by 1 is 4, and then you add the 3 parts, which is 7. So it's 7 divided by 4. Okay, and you can see 7 divided by 4, you end up with 1.75. And again, just like the last slide, you can see there's your smallest, there's your next one, there's your next smallest, there's your large one. Okay, so keep that in mind. The next skill you need to learn is something called simplifying fractions. When you're asked to calculate add, subtract, multiply, divide, you may have to simplify your final answer to get to the end result. Okay, so it says here, write 12 over 60 as a fraction in its simplest form. For this, we can use something called the base 10 number system. Okay, so what you do is you write down 12 over 60. Down the side of the page, you write the numbers 1 all the way through to 0, because you're going to work your way down this system, checking these numbers as you go along. Now, when you simplify fractions, it's the same as equivalent fractions, but this time you only divide, and you have to divide in proportion. Okay, so if you divide the top by 2, you divide the bottom by 2. Okay, so let me show you how this system works. Now we have this number 1. Now the first thing you can do with any fraction is see if the bottom number can be divided by the top. And you can see here, right, the very first thing with any number, doesn't work all the time, but just check anyway. Okay, you can see 60 divided by 12 equals 5. And so that takes you right down to its simplest form. You can't divide it any further. So that's the first thing you do with anything. Just check number 1 that that can happen. And if that doesn't happen, let me show you what to do next. This one, 18 over 40, is a fraction in its simplest form. Let's start at number 1. 1 doesn't work because 18 can't divide into 40. So what you do is you start working your way down the list. Okay, so you can see here, number 1 doesn't work. Wait a minute, number 2. Okay, you can see that both of them are even numbers, so you can divide both numbers by 2. Okay, and that takes you down to 9 over 20. You can then check your numbers again, all the way 1 through to 0, and you can see that there is no common number, so you can't simplify in proportion, and therefore 9 over 20 is its simplest form. Okay, so let's try another one. Write 18 over 40 as a fraction in its simplest form. Okay, write the number. Now start working your way through your list. Okay, 1 doesn't work. Oh, wait a minute, 2 works. So you divide both numbers by 2, and that gives you 14 over 18. And again, you can see that both numbers are even, so you can divide it by 2 again. Okay, and you can see that takes you down to 7 over 9. And again, you see if you check your numbers, none of these numbers can divide in proportion, so therefore 7 over 9 is its simplest form. Okay, now let's try another one. Write 72 over 90 as a fraction in its simplest form. So as you can see, it's getting a little bit more difficult. 90 can't be divided by 72, so 1 doesn't work. Okay, let's try 2. Oh yeah, both are even numbers, so therefore you can divide both numbers by 2, and that gives you 36 over 45. Now you start again. 2 doesn't work because you have an odd number. What do? Start working your way down the list. So if 2 doesn't work, let's try 3. Oh, wait a minute, 3 works. Okay, both numbers can be divided by 3. So therefore, you divide both numbers by 3. That brings you down to 12 over 15. And again, can it be further subdivided? Always check these numbers before you move on. Okay, and if you look at these numbers, you can see they can both be divided by 3 again. Okay, so you divide them by 3 and you can see there the answer is 4 over 5. So 72 over 90 simplified to its simplest form is 4 over 5. Now let's look at one final one. It says here write 200 over 1200 as a fraction in its simplest form. When you get numbers ending in 0 like this, you can go straight all the way down to 0. Okay, and what that means is for every 0 at the top, you can knock 1 off the bottom. So you've got 2 zeros at the top, so you can knock 2 off at the bottom. And you can see there that the answer is 12 over 2. You go back to your list again and work your way down, and you can see there both numbers can be divided by 2. So you can see there that the answer is 1 over 6. Alright, so if you get numbers ending in 0, you can go straight to 0, knock the zeros off, and then start working through your list to get to the answer. Now there is worksheets associated with this video, alright, so look out for these if you've got the PowerPoint presentation. These will give you plenty to practice. Now let's look at our next skill. Find a fraction of a whole number, quantities or measurements. Alright, now to find a fraction of a whole number or quantity, divide the top number by the bottom, then multiply by the given value. Alright, so find 1/6 of 240. And you can see all you do is take 1, divide it by 6, multiply it by 240. Alright, so you can see 1 divided by 6, multiplied by 240, gives you 40. So 1/6 of 240 is 40. Let's try another couple. So find 3/4 of 180. Simply 3 divided by 4, multiplied by 180, tells you that 135 is 3/4 of 180. Couldn't be simpler. Let's try another one. Find 5/6 of 72. 5 divided by 6 multiplied by 72 gives you 60. So 60 is 5/6 of 72. Let's look at the same finding a fraction of a value in a context of an exam question. So a normal price of a computer costs £40. The price is reduced by 1/5 in the sale. So work out the price of the computer game in the sale. Okay, if you want to have a go, pause the video, but let me show you the answer. So find 1/5 of 40. So it's just simply 1 divided by 5 multiplied by 40 tells you that's £8. Then all you do is you simply take the £40, take off the £8, and you can see that the sale price of the computer game is now £32. Okay, and if you have the associated PowerPoint presentation with this video, you can click on the links and you can practice these till your heart's content. Okay, we're going to look at adding, subtracting and multiplying fractions. It's getting a little bit more difficult now. Now to add fractions, they need to have the same bottom number. So for example, if you look at this example here, you can see 2 9s plus 5 9s. Fairly simple, the bottom number stays the same. You add the 2 and the 5 and that gives you 7 over 9. So when you're adding fractions with the same bottom number, relatively easy. But what if the bottom numbers are different? Let me show you a couple of scenarios that give you food for thought. Okay, now example 1, solve 1 over 4 plus 3 over 8. Now this is where we have to go back to the very first skill we learned, and that's equivalent fractions. Okay, now remember, both bottom numbers have got to be the same, so we change this 1/4 to match 8 because it's half. You can see it goes up in proportion by double. Okay, so what we do is we multiply both in proportion to get up to 2/8. So 2 times 4 is 8, 2 times 1 is 2, and once you've done that, you can get rid of your first value, okay, and that leaves you with 2/8 plus 3/8. Just add the 2 and 3 together, and that gives you 5/8. So knowing how to do equivalent fractions is important because it makes life a little easier when adding fractions. Now let's look at another example. You can see with both these bottom numbers, it's not so easy to recognize that common number. You can see 4 was half of 8 here, but this is not so easy to recognize. And trust me, these numbers can get bigger. So what you do is you use something called the X factor. Okay, so what is the X factor? Well, you've got to find the common number at the bottom first, your denominator. So all you do is you take 5 and multiply it by 4. And that gives you a common bottom number of 20, because you can see 20 can be divided by 4 and 20 can be divided by 5. So there's your common denominator. Right, and then the X factor kicks in. So what you do with the 4 is you go across till you get the 2. So it's 4 times 2 is 8. And then you can see the X factor 5 times 1 gives you 5. Okay, and now you can see this is an addition. So you got the bottom numbers the same. You just add the top numbers and you can see that that comes to 13 over 20. And if you check your simplifying numbers from 1 through to 0, you'll see it can't be simplified anymore. So 13 over 20 is its simplest form. Okay. Now a subtraction is done the exact same way, except you subtract the smaller number from the larger number. Alright, so be wary. And again, if you've got the associated PowerPoint with this video, then you can use the worksheets to practice to your heart's content. Now, multiplying fractions. Now, this is very important because the multiplying fractions is the easiest of all calculations to do, but it's vitally important in things like probability. In probability, which is one of the big 6, where you get most of the points from your exam paper, multiplying fractions is super important because sometimes you're presented with more than one choice in probability and you need to be able to multiply these fractions. Okay, but again, it's one of the easiest things to do. All right, so all you simply do, as you can see here, you take the top number and multiply it by the top number. So 2 times 5 is 10, and you do the same to the bottom. 3 times 8 is 24, and you can see now you have 10 over 24. Now you have to simplify it to get your final answer, and this is where your simplifying fractions comes in. Okay, so you can see there, you can divide both numbers by 2, and you can see that the final answer is 5 over 12. So 2/3 times 5/8 is 5/12. Now here's a scenario with probability. Okay, now the probability that a salesperson will get an order is 1 in 4. She has 2 visits tomorrow. What is the probability she will get orders from both visits? Now this is a level 2 question, okay, but it's the same as level 1. Okay, it's no different. If you're presented with 2 like this here, you've got 2 visits tomorrow. All right, each visit's got a 1 in 4 chance. What do you do with that? The question doesn't tell you what to do, and this is where people make a mistake. They usually just add them together, and it's wrong. Okay, now if you remember your Bodmas rules, if there's nothing in between to tell you what to do, you automatically multiply. So you have to multiply that. Okay, and I say multiplying is the easiest of all. 1 times 1 is 1, 4 times 4 is 16. Can't be simplified anymore, so the answer is 1 over 16. Okay, and that's the probability. Now you'll get a worksheet multiplying and dividing fractions. At level 1 or level 2, you don't need to know how to divide fractions, but if you want to practice and have a bit of fun, the only difference between multiplying and dividing is you take this second number here, you can see the second number here, and you turn it on its head, and then you just multiply it. So you don't actually divide when you're dealing with fractions. All right, you only multiply, and you do that by taking the second one, which is called the reciprocal, and turn it on its head. So it'll be 4 over 1. Then you do the multiplication, and it'll give you the answer. Have a practice, all right? It's just a bit of fun, but it helps get fractions in your head a bit better. Good luck. Okay, now let's move up to level 2. We will see some a little bit more difficult when it comes to fractions. Now, when you're working at level 2, you're going to have to learn how to convert to and from improper fractions and mixed fractions. And let me show you how to do that. Okay, now improper fractions and mixed numbers can be converted between each other. This makes calculating a little bit easier. For example, let's take an improper fraction, 11 over 4, and let's convert it to a mixed fraction. Now you've heard me saying a couple of times that's the dividing line. Okay, all you do is simply take 11 and divide it by 4. Okay, so how many 4s are in 11? Well, there's 2, isn't there? How many is left over? Well, there's 3 left over. Okay, and because we're working in a denomination of 4, that bottom number becomes a 4. So it's 2 3/4. And 2 3/4 is the exact same as 11 over 4. It's just in a different format. Okay, now how do we get back? Well, we just simply do it in reverse. Okay, you can see that 4 multiplied by 2. Now, if you remember your pizzas cut into 4 parts, you've got 2 of them already. All right, so you multiply that by 4 and that gives you 8. Okay, and then you add the parts you have, the other 3 parts. So 8 plus 3, you can see, is 11. And because we're working in the denomination of 4, we put the 4 at the bottom. So that is how you convert from an improper fraction to a mixed fraction, and from a mixed fraction to an improper fraction. So now let's see that in action, what a question may look like. Okay, now let's take 2 3/4 plus 3 1/2. So the first thing is we need to convert these to improper fraction because that makes it easier to calculate. Okay, so 4 times 3, 2 times 4 is 8, plus 3 is 11. And because you're working in a denomination of 4, it goes over the 4. Now let's deal with 3 1/2. 2 times 3 is 6, plus 1 is 7. Okay, you're working in the denomination of 2. So you put that over 2. Now you can see the second part of the puzzle, your equivalent fractions come in. Remember, the bottom number has to be the same, so therefore you have to create the equivalent fraction. And so therefore 2 times 2 is 4. 2, you don't need that anymore. 2 times 7, remember, it goes up in proportion. Alright, it's 14. And now you can see the bottom numbers are the same. Now you can do the calculation. 11 plus 14 gives you 25 over 4. Okay, so you now have this improper fraction. Now let's get back. We need to give the answer as a mixed fraction. So we need to go back. Okay, and it's just like before. You take 25 and divide it by 4. How many 4s are in 25? Well, there's 6. 6 6s are 24, which means there's 1 left over. Okay, and because you're working in the denomination of 4, that bottom number has to be a 4. Alright, so that's the full range of the skills that you've learnt in fractions today. Okay, being used in the one question. Right, now our subtraction, as before, is done the same way, except you need to subtract the fraction instead of adding. Okay. Again, there is associated worksheet with this. Adding and subtracting mixed numbers are very useful when you're learning skills. Okay, so good luck with that. Right, so how do we recognise and calculate equivalencies between common fractions, percentages and decimals? Well, let's take our friend a half, okay, and divide it and make it into a decimal. So simply divide the top number by the bottom number to convert to a decimal. And you heard me saying before, there's a dividing line. 1 divided by 2 gives you 0.5. And you can see from experience that 0.5 is the exact same as a half. Okay, and it doesn't matter what these numbers are, you just divide the top by the bottom and it will give you a decimal. Okay, now multiply by 100 to convert to a percentage. So we take our 0.5, you then multiply it by 100, and you can see that the answer is 50%. And again, you can see there from experience, 50% is the same as 0.5, it's the same as a half. Okay, and that's how you convert from a fraction to a decimal to percentage. Stick to that pattern, it's super important when it comes to probability. Okay, now, but what if there's a non-calculator question? Let's have a look. Okay, let's take our friend a half and see how we deal with that. Well, if it's a non-calculator paper, you have to divide the top by the bottom. And so we go back to our old bus stop method again. You can see in 2 into 1 doesn't go. Alright, so you put a 0 up there. Don't forget your decimal point. You then add a 0 below. 2 into 10 is 5. And you can see quite quickly, without a calculator, you can convert to a decimal just simply by dividing the top by the bottom using the old bus stop method. Now let's convert this to a percentage. Okay, take your 0.5. Okay, then all you do when you multiply by 100 is you move the decimal point 2 places to the right and you add a 0. Okay, and so you can see there that 0.5 multiplied by 100 gives you 50%. And that's how you convert without a calculator. How do we work backwards to get to a fraction? How do you convert a decimal to a fraction? Let's have a look. Well, there's your 0.9. How do we convert that to a fraction? Well, you simply put that over the next 10 value up, okay, from 9. So you can see there 9. The next value up is 10. It goes up in values of tens, all right, and that just means 9 out of 10. Okay, let's take 0.39. Right, the next 10 value above 39 is 100. Okay, so it's 39 over 100, and that's your fraction. It's as simple as that. Now let's look at a longer number, 3-digit number, 0.250. You can see the next 10 value up is 1000. So you can quickly convert a decimal to a fraction by putting it over the next 10 value up. And in this case, you can simplify it using your simplifying. Okay, always check to see if these can be simplified. And you can see if you count that in, there is, if you divide 1000 by 250, you can see there's 4, so it's a quarter. All right. Now what about converting a percentage to a fraction? Well, the word percent in Latin means out of every 100. So whatever the percentage is, you just put it over 100. So if you've got 40%, you just put it over 100. And then you can simplify. And you can see that if you keep dividing it and dividing it down, you'll end up with 2 over 5. And that's how you convert a percentage to a fraction. You need to know at level 1 and level 2 to cover fractions. Don't forget to use the worksheets. Thank you.